Happy New Year. 2021 is here. Welcome, everyone, back to Polly Pat. Polly Pat's back for another year. It's 2021, Pat.
It is 2021 for us in the future because we're recording
Yes,
this a little bit early.
exactly.
But yes, it will be 2021 very soon. And happy future New Year, Eric. Awesome.
Yes. Hey, it is the new liturgical year as we record this, though. We'll say
That
that.
is true. That is absolutely right.
Man, is it like refreshing to get past 2020, or is it like, man, what's going to happen in 2020? Is it going to get worse or is it going to get better? I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts? Let's first reflect before we get into our vision for 2021. Let's just reflect back on the craziness of 2020 and reminisce of all the fond memories we have as a society. Beginning, I guess, with I guess the first thing that really happened was the failed impeachment of Donald Trump.
Yep.
And then when that failed, the coronavirus came roaring into American society.
I mean, first off, I'm I'm like so hesitant to even speak because it's December for us in real time right now. By the time this episode airs,
Yes,
it'll be January, and like we don't even know who the president's going to be next year. Still at this point,
that's another weird thing.
Which is crazy, right? There's all these hearings going on at the time of this going on right now. There's all these hearings going on. I just saw that the governor of Georgia is now trying to push for a signature audit of the ballot. So I don't know. A lot of people are counting Donald Trump out. I think it's a good rule to never just count Donald Trump out. I mean, you brought up the failed impeachment, right? People have counted Donald Trump out even before he was elected last time. Like, no way. So just as a precedent, maybe you shouldn't be like overly confident that Donald Trump will be the next president. But I think it's always a little unwise to count Donald Trump out. He's consistently defied expectations. So all that's to say is like, I have no idea, right? I have no idea who the president's going to be next year. Our country is in crazy amounts of upheaval. Various states are still imposing. We're in different states, Eric. So I'm in Wisconsin. You're in Colorado. Various responses, lockdowns to the corona situation. So I mean, where to even begin? I have no idea.
It's just the weirdest year in my recollection. I mean, apart from like it being a terrible year societally, it's just a weird year. Like, in what other year is there this much turmoil over an election? In what year is there like cities burning from riots? The BLM thing that we talked about earlier this summer. Like,
right.
The cancel culture went crazy this year as well. And then, these lockdowns, it seems like at first with the coronavirus, it's like, okay, we don't know this thing. Like, maybe it is really deadly. And now in light of the science that like literally less than 1% of people die from it. And most of those, unfortunately, of course, anyone who dies from it, and that's a tragedy. But most of those are in the vulnerable category. There are exceptions for sure. But now that we know the science that less than 1% die, and it really doesn't affect kids all that much, why are we shutting down public schools still? Like, in light of the science that we do know, why are we continuing these lockdowns? So it creates this skepticism in the heart of Americans. I would say.
Because the people that say follow the science are the people that absolutely don't follow the science. If somebody has to say follow the science repeatedly, probably they don't follow the science, right? And, there was another paper that came out about infection fatality rates, fairly recently. And exactly what you said. It's not, less than 1%, and the average death is like 76.4 years of age. And now again, we're looking at this as like a public policy perspective. We're not saying that anybody who dies from this, that isn't a tragedy. Of course it is, but you can't, when you think of public policy, you have to look at statistics. You do, just realistically. But even beyond that is we have the science and the data now that show that lockdowns don't do anything except for make poor people poorer and hurt people. So it's not even like, the survival rate is one thing, but what evidence do we have that lockdowns make any difference? And the answer is we not only don't have evidence that they make a positive difference, we have considerable evidence that they make no meaningful difference, right? And that they
And a
just
negative
add
difference.
harm. Yeah, they just make a negative difference. And I've done a number of podcasts on this with different experts. I just had a statistician, a mathematical statistician from Cornell, who worked for many years in medical statistics, come on and just explode the whole myths of this phony lockdown business. So it's terribly
Yeah.
annoying. It's terribly tragic, and it's this phony. My real feelings are coming out as if I'm ever shy about hiding them. Anyways, this phony propaganda nonsense. There's this sort of like political incentive to
Yeah.
always feel like you're doing something, right? We gotta do something. So make everyone wear masks and shut everyone up in their houses and all this ridiculous, foolish stuff. But you do have some brave politicians who are saying, look, despite what the mainstream media and is doing with their corona doom panic reporting, we actually are gonna keep things open, and we'll do focus protection measures where appropriate, but
Yeah.
otherwise we're going to get on with living our lives. And I have a lot of respect for those politicians, because the media unfairly bombards them and tries to paint them out as some type of like wicked evil leader. But those are the heroes in this situation, as far as I'm concerned. The ones
Mm-hmm.
who are really just willing to take an honest look at these things and do what they feel is actually best for their population, rather than just going with the hysteria. So I don't know, Eric. I guess like, if there was a year that the devil just had an absolute hissy fit, I feel like I feel like it has to be 2020. How do you explain everything that's going on apart from spiritual warfare? I could never
Yeah.
do it. Before I
Yeah.
was a Catholic, I don't think how I would have ever been able to make sense of all this. I just see a profound spiritual warfare happening in our country right now.
Oh yeah. It's just wild. And I mean, um, one example of that is during the election in Colorado, we had voting on Proposition 115, which basically was, if we voted yes on it, was going to make any abortion after 22 weeks illegal. So right now, the law in Colorado is that you can kill your baby even at 9 months, like as it's coming out of the womb, basically. You can just kill your babies, and which is horrible and awful, obviously, and just the most wicked thing you could probably think of. And we're one of 7 states that has that, where you can kill your baby up to 9 months. And so the Catholic Church, I'm so proud of here in Colorado, really like was in every parish, and they gave away signs to people, say, vote yes on Proposition 115, like end late term abortion. Obviously, we want all abortion to end from conception through, like we want no murders to happen, no innocent
Right.
life, no innocent bloodshed. But this is a step in the right direction, and the Catholic Church did a great job of like promoting voting yes on this proposition, and it failed. 60% voted no, voted against it in Colorado. And to me, I'm like, okay, Colorado and America in general and the world in general, like when you complain of something bad happening, just remember what you did. Like it says in Proverbs that wisdom was crying out in the streets, and on the day of calamity, she will laugh at you. She will laugh at you. And so it's like, if we deserve the wrath of God, like America deserves it, the world deserves it, we're killing babies and we're voting to do it. And so it's like, if anything bad happens in 2021, I'm sorry, you can obviously repent, and please do repent, because God hears that and wants you to repent.
Yeah.
But
Amen.
like, don't complain because you did this. Like you will reap what you sow, and you sowed innocent blood. You sowed death, and you're going to reap death. And that is just like my thoughts about that. So
Well, look, I've heard a number of theologians make that point. It's like, look, in a lot of instances, you get the government you deserve, right?
yeah.
Um, you get the situations that you've sown. You reap what you sow. That's true. Yeah, I'm torn on this, right? Because part of me is like, dang, like, say whatever else you want about Trump, but he he did a lot for the pro-life cause, and not just legally with the appointment of judges, which is obviously hugely important, but culturally too. We know pro-life um, affiliation and sentiments are on the rise. So it's like, the one of the most disappointing aspects for me about a Biden presidency is the damage that will do to the pro-life momentum that we have
Yeah.
right now. Right. I mean, he's a terrible man. Biden's a terrible man. There's no doubt about it. He's a liar. He's a plagiarist. Like anything bad that people want to say about Donald Trump, like Biden's got that covered and more. The only difference is people confuse style with character. I found, right? They
Yeah.
confuse style with character. Biden has a more amenable style, but he's got a far worse character as far as I'm concerned, right? I mean, let's just go through the list, right? He's a failed presidential candidate before because he was caught red-handed as being a demonstrated plagiarist, right? He's flip-flopped on every major issue, either in the wrong direction or has moved in the worst direction, including things, especially as Catholics should be deeply alarmed about, including not just abortion, but same-sex marriage, gender issues. Like, he's just deeply unprincipled. He's always somebody who's just checking the cultural climate, seeing where the political opportunities are, and just going right for them. He's just wrong on virtually every foreign policy decision he's ever made. His notorious 90s crime bill is hilariously ironic, especially for a party that is supposedly against systemic racism. This man would, by their definition, be one of the greatest contributors to it. He was accused, credibly, according to his vice president, of sexual harassment. So, I mean, like, just go down the list of this man's character. Like, what is one redeeming quality about this guy, aside that he's got, I guess, a nice smile or a fairly amenable style? Whereas Trump, yeah, he's a little bit, upfront, abrasive, all these other things. But don't confuse style with character. Joe Biden is a bad man. He's a bad man. He defies church teaching, but yet he constantly wants to parade around this idea that he's Catholic, that, he was been denied communion. He can't claim an inculpable ignorance on this. There's no way that he's gone this far of his life being a Catholic, not knowing what the church teaches on issues of abortion, which he continually pushes. I see no redeeming qualities in Joe Biden. I pray for him.
Yeah.
I pray for his repentance.
Exactly.
I really do.
Yeah.
It's a serious, and I think he'd be a catastrophe. He'd be a catastrophe. He has already threatened again to impose birth control on nuns, right? So he's a serious threat, not just to pro-life, but religious liberty.
Yeah.
It's just a disaster. It's just an absolute disaster. So that's my biggest disappointment about, but all of that aside, the thing that I'm most, I guess, down about a Biden presidency would be the clear, almost immediate damage it would do to the pro-life momentum that we already have in this country. Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because I watched his acceptance speech. Once again, as we're recording this, we don't actually know who the president is, but most likely it will probably be Biden, I guess. But when I was hearing his acceptance speech, the thing about it is that, and maybe there's something wrong with me, but I kept thinking, he believes in killing babies. I don't trust a word he's saying. He believes in killing babies. I don't trust a word he's saying. So that's why abortion colors all other issues. It's like, you believe in shedding innocent blood. I'm sorry, I can't trust you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's goes to show, like, the right to life is the most fundamental issue. So whatever else you want to say about, one second. Whatever else you want to say about other rights, right? They're all derivative on that fundamental right to life. So, don't give me a bunch of crap about human dignity elsewhere if you're not willing to affirm that which if you're not willing to affirm human dignity through and through, right? Yeah. Either humans have dignity in virtue of what they are, or they don't have dignity at all. You can't try and say they have dignity in virtue of what they're able to do, right? Dignity can't be an achievement. It can't be something that just comes about when you reach a certain level of performance or cognitive ability, right? Because then we're going to have all sorts of, first off, it's just metaphysically absurd to think that, but then you're going to have all sorts of disastrous moral consequences that you don't want to accept. But that's a lot of where the left is. It seems to be exactly where Biden is. You have dignity based on some level of achievement or development or location where you are or degree of dependence. Mm-hmm. That's certainly not what the church teaches. That's not the Christian belief. And I'm not ever going to take you seriously on moral judgments, nor should I, nor should anybody. So your point is well taken, Eric. Like, if you can't see that there's something horribly wrong about murdering babies, that's where the conversation stops for me. I'm never going to be able to take you seriously on other issues, right?
Yeah. It's like, you don't care about immigration. You don't care about human lives. You don't care about black lives. You don't care about white lives. You don't care about any lives because you don't care about the babies in the womb, the most innocent lives among us. Like, if you don't care about the most innocent lives, how am I going to expect you to protect my guilty self? You know?
Right. And it's one of those things like if abortion, if the pro-life movement had enough, I guess, cultural opportunity for the Democrat Party right now, Biden probably would be pro-life, right? Like he would be, but that's exactly the problem, right? And that's
Yeah.
what we've seen with Biden is he just goes wherever, whatever the cultural political winds are for the Democratic Party, right? He's not a man who takes a principled stand on anything, and that should be deeply alarming. And again, whatever else you want to say about President Trump, he has taken nothing but continual abuse from virtually every major outlet that you can imagine,
Yeah.
and he stood firm. And there's things with Trump that I think are that I don't agree with. In fact, I'm glad how pro-life he is, but one of his statements was that abortion with the exception of rape. I think that's wrong. I think he's dead wrong. You can understand why somebody might hold a sentiment like that, but again, the manner of your conception doesn't determine your human dignity, right?
Right.
You have dignity
Exactly.
and virtue of what you are. So I think Trump is wrong there. But at least he's got it generally right, even if he needs correction on a specific part of it. Whereas
Yeah.
Biden is just completely directionally generally wrong, right?
It's interesting. Talking about the craziness of 2020, and how really it's been awful for our society. There's going to be way more people that are starving to death because of this. I think the gravest statistic about the lockdowns is that they've done research to show that from the age of 18 to 24, like that group of people, 1 in 4 people have considered suicide,
Wow.
which is a huge increase.
Hmm.
And we're seeing an increase in the suicides, I believe. I haven't checked all the statistics,
Yeah,
but
deaths of despair have gone up. Yeah.
and then we
Mhm.
see like mental illness problems, like all these problems with the lockdowns. And so it's like, okay, in light of this science that this virus actually, like, it is bad, but it's not like, it's worse though at this point. Like, now that we know that it only kills less than 1% of people, it's worse to have. And now we see, like, for kids, for instance, it's worse for them to get the regular flu. And we never
Right.
shut down whole societies for that.
Yeah.
Um, and so it makes you think like there's something deeper going on, something more irksome, something like some evil conundrum. And like you said, it's spiritual warfare. Like, we know that our fight is really not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers in the heavenly places.
Right.
Um,
Eric, I want to say one more thing because I just want
yeah.
people to understand the issue, right? So it's the survival rate is one thing, but even if the survival, and you're right, if you're a child, the flu is more deadly for you. Now, if you're above a certain age and you have a certain degree of comorbidities, COVID is worse for you, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
It's got this weird spread, right? Where it does seem to be more fatal for people who are elderly or have comorbidities. It's like 1,000-fold difference in
Yes.
fatality, right? Like,
Yes.
it's crazy.
Yes.
Like, it's just a weird thing. But what I want to say is, yes, the survival rate on this thing, people need to look into that and get a sense of general perspective. That will really help. But even if the survival rate were much worse, that wouldn't still justify lockdowns, right? Because we don't have reason to think that lockdowns work no matter what,
That's
right?
true.
So, like, the survival rate is almost irrelevant to it. And what people need to understand is that it's not like we've done lockdowns and lockdowns have saved lives but also cost lives, so it kind of balances out. No, the right perspective is this: the lockdowns have not only not saved any lives but have cost a bunch of lives. So it's nothing but a net loss.
Yeah.
That's the point that needs to be emphasized. It's not like we're really balancing pros and cons here, where it's like, yeah, okay, lockdowns are costly but they save a bunch of lives. No, there's no reason to think that that's the case at all.
Yeah.
The only thing, what the right way to think about it is that we don't have any good evidence to suggest that lockdowns save lives. We have strong evidence to suggest that they don't. And we do have very good evidence to show that lockdowns kill, make people poorer, can set up for longer term serious economic consequences.
Yeah.
Possibly even there's projections, especially in other countries that aren't as well off as we are, of potential mass starvations, famines, all the
Yeah.
interruptions from international trade, stuff like that. And that is the point that I want to really want to emphasize is the fatality rate does give you a sense of perspective. It's important to understand that, so you're not just going around completely paranoid all day. But even if that was much worse, it still wouldn't justify the government policies that are being put into place.
Which begs the question, why is the government still doing it? Why are certain places still doing it? Why has California become this communist regime, basically? Like, why? And to me, the BLM movement this summer showed why. It's because there's Marxist ideology that's being forced and propagated. I'm stepping into maybe some conspiracy here, but it just seems like, okay, like the government wants us to all like get used to being utterly dependent on them and them having the power to make all these rules. So gradually we forget what freedom was like, and then we get into this slave mentality, dependence on the state, and now we have to vote for the politicians that will feed into our dependency on them
Right.
and take away our freedom, and also to isolate us, because this is a spiritual battle. Humans aren't made for isolation, we're made for community. And so we're called to love God with all we have and love one another. It's really hard to do that when you don't have other people to love, like when you're just isolated. And so it just like is all this mess that is makes it very fascinating when we look back on 2020, right? It's like, okay, what's,
Right.
and
So
that makes it like disconcerting almost when we look towards 2021, like, what's
I know,
gonna happen?
I know. So you bring up a really good point. Is you're right. I think a lot of this is compliance testing. Certainly, those who want greater government intervention in people's lives I think, do see this as an opportunity for reasons that you said. But we cannot. I don't think we can analyze anything that's gone on this year independently of Trump. Like Trump is such a significant figure, and like anybody with a halfway decent BS detector knows that so much of this response is just pure retaliation and spite for what Trump has said, right?
Yeah.
And we saw this early on. Like at first, Trump said like, maybe we should like shut things down or travel or close travel to China. And what did all the Democrats say? They said, no, you're crazy, you're racist. Chuck Schumer's like, I want to go down and eat in Chinatown and all this fantastic idiotic stuff. And then Trump then starts questioning lockdowns. And then the Democrats go like double all in on them, right? And the same thing with like masks. It's like whatever Trump says, the left has such hatred for Trump that they've always got to take the opposite position at any point along the way, right?
Yeah,
And there was a
even
New
if it
York Times
contradicts science.
and there was like a New York Times article or one of these horrible leftist rags out there that put it in there that actually had a somewhat honest, assessment of the current situation and say, well, it was to like Democrat politicians to say, well, look, something isn't wrong just because Trump says it, right? Right. Where it's just like Trump was right about a number of these things, and like we have to admit it. Just through different, things that have happened through 2020, but specifically related to Corona, that Trump was right. And the whole mess around hydroxychloroquine or whatever that drug was. Now we have studies coming out affirming that this actually does help people with with novel coronavirus and the recovery rates. And like this was another fantastic thing that just because Trump got behind it early on, there was this sort of immediate hysterical backlash
Yeah.
against it, and a very unreasonable one where so many medical professionals were like, this is insane, right? There is a Castro consensus, political pressures that are strictly interfering with good science because you people are so upset and honestly deranged by Donald Trump. There really does need to be a large-scale research project into Trump derangement syndrome. I am convinced that this is a real operative thing in society. Just
Yeah.
like apart from spiritual warfare, it's like the only way to explain the behavior of so many people in our country is like they really are operating under Trump derangement syndrome. It's crazy. So I think it's a lot of both ends, Eric. I think there's
Yeah.
one is just the natural politicization of everything in our culture, including public policy around
Yeah.
COVID. If Trump says this, we have to say that, right? No matter what. I think it's also what you said: deep Marxist socialist ideologies, all about just boiling that frog slow. Compliance testing, creating greater government dependence, greater government intervention into more areas of our life. That certainly seems absolutely right to me. So I just think it's just a an analysis that needs to be done on many different levels that have
Yeah.
resulted to the sheer insanity. I mean, we're just at a point of sheer insanity as
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned.
Now I would say, all this to say, as Christians, there's no reason to fear. There's no reason to um, be afraid, because we have the gospel, we have Jesus. And this is a thought that keeps recurring in my mind, is that if your goal in life, and we said this before actually when we first talked about redemptive suffering back in March with the coronavirus fresh on the scene in America. And we talked about how when your goal in life is intimacy with Jesus Christ, that intimate union with Christ, to know Jesus, then you don't fear suffering or death. Because if you suffer, you can suffer with Christ and get to know him in his suffering on the cross, and then offer that suffering for the healing and salvation of the world. If you die with Christ in his death, and then you get to be in the glory lands in heaven, God willing, right? And so it's like, if you suffer, you gain intimacy. If you die, you gain intimacy. If neither of those things happen, you also gain intimacy because you can offer your own life and your joys with his joys. And so if your goal in life is intimacy with Jesus Christ, then be not afraid. You know, God has rescued us from the fear of slavery. And the fear of death. He's rescued us from that. We don't have to fear death. We can welcome it with open arms. We can even long for it in a sense, because that allows us to get to the resurrection. If we suffer with him, we will also be glorified with him. And so there's nothing to be afraid of. Yes, it's good to be, I think it's so good though, to be in tune with the spirit of the air as far as like, what is the devil doing? So you can be aware of his tactics and his attempts to make you not peaceful. But like, I read a great book this year called Searching for and Maintaining Peace by Father Jacques Philippe. Very short little treatise on peace, and nothing should steal our peace as Christians. We have a sense of holy detachment where it's like, Father, let your will be done, not mine. If things go crazy, if we live under a communist regime or Marxist regime, whatever, don't lose your peace. Be a light, be bold, be a saint, be a martyr, which I believe, talking about 2021 ahead, I feel like that's what's coming. I don't know if it's going to be in 2021 or in future years, but we can see this move in our culture where basically, let's just give an example. If you don't, not only if you don't agree with LGBTQ stuff, but if you don't celebrate that, then you are now labeled as a bad person. You are now labeled as evil, and you should be blotted out. Well, guess what? Like, the ones that actually care about the people that struggle with same-sex attraction, the ones that actually will their good and know that them acting on those impulses and engaging in those acts is sinful and wrong and evil, and it's not their best good. The ones who actually love and are willing to speak the truth in love, they're the ones that are now labeled as evil. And so it's just interesting because that involves all of real Christians, right? The real Christians actually hold what Jesus and the apostles taught. And the Catholic Church does teach this, that same-sex attraction, that's different. Same-sex actually acting on it, that's a sin. That's not in their best interest. And we talked about that in our episode on sex and freedom and all of that. But I'm just giving an example of like, when we are now labeled evil because we don't agree with the common narrative and we don't celebrate it because we know it's not actually loving to them, then we're up for persecution. We will be persecuted.
Of course. Yeah. A lot to say of that. All really good points. How do I feel? First off, you're right. Catholics are obligated, at least in the final analysis, to be optimists, right? No matter what, right?
We have the resurrection.
Keep that in mind. Perfect love casts out all fear. Keep that in mind. But, in the temporal, proximate level, am I pessimistic? I don't know, man. I feel like we're definitely at a critical impasse in our country. And I think a lot of it's going to come down to whether Donald Trump prevails at this point. I think the reason the left has hated Donald Trump so much, why they're willing to rig an election, which I'm convinced that they did, right, at this point, and they really had to show their hand in this rigging. I mean, these hearings are incredible right now. The affidavits, the evidence that has actually come out. Anybody who says there is no evidence, just you either have no eyes or no brain. And that's just the fact at this point. Now, will it overturn the election remains to be seen. But part of the reason that I feel that the left has had to be so flagrant and so aggressive is because they see that Donald Trump is a real threat to the leftist movement and agenda. So if Trump goes, I'm definitely more pessimistic. I definitely could see increased, serious issues on the horizon for religious freedom and persecution of the church. If Trump is still there, and for the next 4 years, I think we got a fighting chance for this country still, because there's a lot of enthusiasm and there's a lot of people, patriots, Christians, who are standing up and fighting back.
Mhm.
So I can't prognosticate right now, as while the election is still up in the air. But I certainly, like, sometimes, like, people get this like messianic fervor around Trump. You definitely don't want that, right? But there's something about him specifically, and it's mostly how much the left hates him, that is a signal that we are at a critical juncture in our country right now, that I feel like this is the moment to stand up and really fight. And that's what we should do, right? Patriotism is a virtue. It is a virtue that St. John Paul II talks about a lot, right? That we have duties and obligations to our country in a sort of in an extensional way that we do to our own family, the nation, right? And if we feel that there's some great evil going on in our country, we have obligations in Christian love and charity to stand up, call it out, and say, this isn't right. No, this is evil, right? We demand election integrity. We demand fair elections. We demand justice, all these things. So I'm actually kind of inspired to see how much not only Trump has been willing to call these shenanigans, but many other Americans as well. So yeah, I guess that's where I'm at on whether the next 4 years, an
Yeah.
optimist or a pessimist. I think if Trump prevails, I'm going to be more optimistic. I still think we got a huge cultural battles to fight, and we can't let our guard down. If Trump falls, then yeah, I think I'm going to be more still optimistic ultimately, right? Given all the
Yeah.
reasons that you
Yeah.
just said, but I think it would be very bad news for our country. And I'm not one to say that lightly. There's people out there that say that, with every election, this is the end of the country or this or that. And obviously that hasn't been the case. But I think if people take a realistic look, as we've been saying, Eric, and see that 2020 is definitely the craziest political year of my life. I've never experienced anything like this,
Yeah.
right? Um, I think there's really something to the idea that we are at a critical juncture at the life, the soul of our nation, like right now, right at this
Yeah.
moment in
And
history.
what's crazy is by the time we release this recording, we're recording this on December 4th. When we release it, on my end at least, I'll release it on January 1st, 2021. And so we don't know. Maybe like it'll be very clear by then, I guess. I think actually next week they're supposed to make it pretty clear, as far as like the states confirming their final
Well, as
votes
far
and
as the
stuff.
delegates go, yeah,
Yeah. So I
but
think,
yep.
yeah, by the time this episode gets released, it will be clear. And I would say, I want to ask you, Pat, though, like, okay, so let's say Biden is the president. Does that mean that all these people that supported Trump, or not even Trump supporters, let's just say people that are Christians that want religious liberties and all of these things, you know, do they cease fighting? Do they cease standing up and fighting just because the president now is a liberal?
Oh yeah, no, of course not, right? I mean, if anything, I would always hope that the Christian attitude, the Catholic attitude, is the same. We preach the gospel.
Yeah.
That's it, right? We preach Christ crucified no matter what. Sometimes it might be easier, sometimes it might be more difficult, sometimes we might have more or less risk to our own lives, our own careers. But I mean, that's just the Great Commission. That's like, that should never change, ever. Um, and we know that the church, the best way to grow the church is to persecute it. I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
unfortunate truth. It's a sad truth, but you see in like Western civilization where, and I'm not saying there hasn't been persecution in the church in Western civilization. It's just been a different type of persecution, right? A more subtle persecution in many
Yeah.
ways. But it is in those areas historically where the church was, where the sword was often applied to the church, that we saw incredible growth. And I was just reading not too long ago, preparing for a dialogue, just revisiting the letters of Saint Ignatius, and his epistle to Rome is just like deeply inspiring, because he's like saying, like, you guys need to let me be food to the wild beasts, right? Like the way,
Yeah. That's my gateway to
like it's just,
heaven.
yeah, like it's like, man, this guy's got it, right?
Yes.
He's like so willing, and sees like honor of being just like chewed up by the lions in testimony of Christ. And Yeah, there's a lot of lessons there, and they're lessons that I haven't even fully appreciated or
Yeah.
comprehended yet. But I think reading figures like that could be very, very nourishing. I'm not saying that like I
Yeah.
obviously don't think if Biden's president, like all Christians are going to some coliseum, right? Obviously
Yeah.
not, right? I think it'll just be a
Yeah.
progressive erosion, maybe a more aggressive than it has been of religious liberty and stuff like that. But that's of course terrible in its own right. But
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, no, I don't think our response should change at all. If anything, it should
Yeah.
embolden us. It should empower
And,
us.
if Biden is president, I mean, we have to still honor the office, right? And so that doesn't mean we can't call him like Jesus called Herod a fox, like a wolf, but we honor the presidency. Um, I mean, classic example is that in the Bible, it says honor the emperor. And um, that was during the persecution of Christians, like extreme persecution of Christians. So, uh, yeah, so we have to still honor the office, even if the person is corrupt. Now, that doesn't mean we have to do everything that they tell us, because if they contradict, God's precepts, we also go in line with, okay, is it better to obey you or to obey God? And so we still submit to their punishments, because that's not even much of a punishment. Like death is not much of a punishment to a Christian who views death as a gateway to heaven. That's what's beautiful about Christianity, Pat. Is like, okay, there's nothing to threaten us with. Like, I love that. It's like, you can't threaten me with suffering because I can gain intimacy with Christ. You
Right,
can't
right.
threaten me with death because I gain intimacy with Christ. When your goal is
Mhm,
intimacy with Christ, no one can threaten you at all. No
mhm.
government, nothing. You are fearless. You can be courageous. You can face anything. I love that's good news. Like, that's the gospel.
Right,
uh,
yeah. And no, it's good that you pointed out that there are performative constraints around the idea of respecting the emperor, right?
yes.
You respect him, in the political office to the extent that you're not being willed to do things contrary to God's will,
Yeah,
right? And if
exactly.
it does come to that, then you know what side you have to take as a
Yep.
Christian, as a Catholic. There's just that's it.
Yeah, and so to wrap up this episode, I think it'd be cool to touch on just shifting gears, because we're talking, meta narrative, meta picture here of society, but zooming into our maybe personal lives, what we kind of thought about 2020 in our own lives, and then 2021, what's coming. I can start with 2020. Interestingly enough, for me, it's been an awesome year, actually. Like, uh, just, for me personally, I got to move to Colorado right before the pandemic happened. So then when it was on lockdown, I got to go hiking in the mountains a lot and be with God in the mountains. And I was finishing up grad school, so I finished that this year, and came out with 2 books: Thoughts of a Sacramental Mind this summer, and Visible Unity: A Calling of Christ for the Church in November. Um, but the biggest highlight for me was I met my girlfriend Katie, and things are going very well there. And so I just that's been such a highlight for me. And so in a sense, I feel like I'm like the Israelites in the land of Goshen, where Pharaoh, they were in Egypt, they were in this foreign land, but God protected his people in the land of Goshen.
Yep.
And that's the sense that I get for 2021 as well. I feel like there's a sense of which, like, God's protecting me, and no matter what craziness is going on in the world, and I obviously care deeply for the suffering that's happening, and I want to offer my own sufferings that are inevitable as well with the suffering Christ for the alleviation of that suffering, because
Yeah.
ultimately one day all tears will be wiped away and everything. And so it's not that I'm trying to be callous or towards the world or anything. It's just I'm just pointing out, like, in my own life, this seems to be what's happening, and I'm very appreciative. I have undergone immense suffering while the world is not undergoing much suffering. So it's like, whatever. But
Right.
so for 2021, what I'm looking forward to uh, is, potential marriage. So I'm really excited for that. So my focus on 2021 is marriage preparation. And with that, acquiring a job would be good for me in preparation for marriage and all of that. And then a big thing that I have coming that I did want to announce, and I don't think I've even told you about this, Pat, is I'm coming out with a website called ucoetry.com.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yes, so it's Eucharistic poetry. It's poems written in the presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. So in Eucharistic
Oh,
adoration.
hmm.
And so this idea struck me about a year ago, and I was in Eucharistic adoration, and I was like, I wrote a poem. And then after I wrote the poem, I was like, that'd be so cool if there was like a lot of people that want to do this, where it's like when I'm in the presence of God, I'm writing about the presence of God while I'm in the
Hmm.
presence of God. And it's
Right.
just like, whoa, that'd be so cool. So I created this website. My friend helped me develop it. Um, that basically anyone can submit a poem that's written in the presence of God. And so it's a way to attract people to the beauty of having intimacy with Jesus Christ through the Eucharist in this poetic way, in attracting through the beautiful writing, which I'm not claiming to be a great poet by any means, but you'll at least see some of the stuff that I've come up with the past year on ucoetry.com. And I'm hoping to collect these poems and develop it into a book someday so people can have a hard copy to bring into Eucharistic adoration. And if they just need to feel inspired or get fresh revelation on the Eucharist, like there's going to be a whole book of poems about that. So I'm so excited to come out with that, and maybe one other book next year that are a collection of essays I wrote during grad school. So
Wow.
that's what I'm looking forward to in 2021 for sure.
Wow, man, I mean, first off, God bless you. That's some really fantastic stuff all around. I'll just
Thanks.
briefly echo a few things that you said is despite the craziness of 2020 and the general suffering that a lot of people are going through, uh, it's been a great year.
Yeah.
And spiritually, it's been a great year. I mean, I remember when Corona first hit, I mentioned this on the podcast, and Mass was suppressed and the sacraments taken away. We made a promise to God, give us the Mass back, and we're taking the whole family to daily Mass. Now, we were pretty frequent Mass goers anyways, never miss a Sunday, and we usually get the daily Mass 2 to 3 times a week. But we're like, give us the Mass back, Lord, bringing the whole family there, daily Mass. And we've done it. The Mass came back, and it's been the spiritual fruits of the, and like that came out of suffering though, right? Like that's part of how suffering can lead to greater intimacy. I mean, that's something that has been directly experienced. The amount of time I've spent with the rosary
Mm.
this year is significantly increased. And that's a beautiful thing. That's much needed for me. We welcomed our newest addition, Marin, into the world just a few months before 2020. So got to get to know her,
Wow.
this year. Always, I mean, just the infinite incredibleness that is that. So yeah, I'm with you. And there's been definitely personal challenges, but I would say on just like a deep spiritual level, this has been a very fruitful year, both for myself
Mm-hmm.
and my family. And I thank God for that. I thank God for the protections. As much as it's hurting other people, the lockdowns and stuff haven't really affected us that much. I run an online business, so I kind of just have a natural, I guess, safeguard there that many people have brick and mortar businesses, unfortunately, are struggling. So I'm just very blessed and thankful for God on that front that it hasn't really hurt me or our family that much. So I'm with you, Eric. I feel like God has given us some very special protections during this time. That I try to always remain mindful of and grateful for. Next year, what do I have? Yeah, I want to make kind of 2021 the year of more academic publication. So I've already got kind of 2
Oh.
journal articles that I plan to submit for publication. And then maybe, God willing, whatever happens with them, if they're accepted or rejected, we'll see. Then maybe turn those into I kind of was thinking maybe a book of just a collection of articles, essays, that type of thing. I've done
Mm-hmm.
enough of like the full start to finish books. I don't think I have another one of those in me right now, but a collection, an essay book, something like that,
That's
maybe just
yes.
on the project front. Otherwise, that's it, man. That's all I've got. So just trying to keep the family, just trying to get the whole family to be saints. That's
Yes.
my number one priority in life right
Yes.
now as a
Yes.
husband and father. Mm-hmm.
That is awesome. Hey man, it's actually I was counting. This is episode 38 for our Polypat episodes. So
Awesome.
that's pretty cool. In 2020, we did 37 polypaths.
Hey man, I love these, and I hope
Yeah.
that people get a lot out of these because they're some of my
Yeah.
favorite conversations.
Cool. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And hey, if you get a chance, check out euchoetry.com, EUCHOETRY.com. And we'll catch you later. Happy New Year and happy feast day of Mary, Mother of God, lest we forget. God bless
Amen.
everyone. Yes.